People love to bag on humid DC summers, but I actually love them. And what better way to kick off this summer than with Columbia Heights Day on June 15th? So the rumor is that this idea came about when a bunch of friends were tossing around ideas over beers at Wonderland Ballroom. And shockingly, they actually followed through with it. And now the day is still around 16 years later. So there's going to be a dunk tank, a mechanical bull, a bouncy house, and even a watermelon seed spitting competition. So come out to it. It's at Harriet Tubman Elementary School on June 15th from 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. And it's going to be fun.
Today on CityCast DC, the upcoming 11th Street Bridge Park will link Capitol Hill and Navy Yard with the Anacostia and Fairlawn neighborhoods. It's an exciting and in some ways complicated project. Next week's episodes will be dedicated to DC's green spaces, so what better time than now to revisit our earlier conversation with Ronald Moten from Don't Mute DC and Scott Kratz of the 11th Street Bridge Park project to get into what it means for the city. Oh, and after the interview, stick around for a sponsored chat with Casey Trees about their work preserving green spaces in DC. Today's Monday, June 3rd. I'm Bridget Todd, and here's what DC is talking about. I'm here with Scott Kratz, the 11th Street Bridge Park Director, and Ronald Moten of Don't Mute DC. Thank you both so much for being here. Welcome.
Thanks so much.
So, Scott, let's start with you. For folks who might not know, what exactly is the 11th Street Bridge Park?
The 11th Street Bridge Park is a partnership between our East of the River nonprofit, building bridges across the river, and the District Department of Transportation to transform an old, aged-out freeway into a new park. So we had this old freeway that was built in the 1960s that reached the end of its lifespan and needed to be replaced. And instead of getting rid of the whole infrastructure, we decided to see how we could try and save it and repurpose it and extend the life of that initial federal investment, but replace it with something that no longer holds cars or tractor trailers, but that holds community-generated programming spaces.
So what do both of you think that this park could mean to the community once it's opened?
I think that it can be some model of how you bring something special to the community with the community being a part of it, and something to bring people together in the community versus what normally happens is something new comes, pushes people out of the community, and people don't feel like they're a part of what's coming to the community. I'm a business owner who's been here for over 10 years, but there's some people who spent the last 50 years here. And sometimes they feel like they're not involved and engaged. I think the 11th Street Bridge Project is a model of how you create an environment and a vehicle to bring people together and enhance the quality of life of everybody who's been in the community and who come to the community.
What are some of the ways that it looks like to make sure that the community is really part of making this park happen?
Before we engaged a single architect or landscape architect, we spent 2 years, to Ron's point, just going out in the community and telling us, what do you think, right? I think oftentimes these projects happen where an almost finished idea is presented to the community and it's like, now we want your thought. And you're like, well, no, not really, because you're rearranging the chairs at that point, right? And for us, and particularly recognizing that east of the river has a large and justifiable trust deficit, right? Because let's just be frank, like people who probably look just like me have come in the community again and again and made a lot of promises, right? And for a variety of reasons, those promises haven't been fulfilled. It was really critical as we started to just come in and ask, like, should we even do this? Like, in essence, sort of ask for permission. And so we had over 200 meetings those first 2 years with faith leaders, with community leaders, with organizers, with business owners of just saying, like, here's an idea. What do you think? And there was, some skepticism to be sure, but a lot of enthusiasm. They said, all right, well then what should be on the park? Right? So every single element from the park, from the play space to the environmental education center to a performance space was the number one idea that the community asked for, was baked into an international design competition. We sort of think about describing this project. It's how do you put decision-making power back into the hands of local residents, right? So we pulled together a group of 36 stakeholders who reviewed our design brief, met with our 4 final design teams again and again. And then at the end of this 8-month process, it was the community that selected the design team. So I didn't vote, right? The community voted, and whatever the community voted, we're going to have to go out and raise a bunch of money and make this happen. But this is for the community. The community should be in the position to decide. So I think those are some ways that how this shows up.
Ron, I'm curious to know from you, as someone who has been in the Southeast DC area for a while, why do you think folks in the community want to see this park happen?
Me personally, when I first saw it, I was like, oh, here go another white man coming to my community.
Talking about Scott
news,
here.
So-called good news, colonizer. I mean, I'm just telling you what came to mind.
Right.
And the more and more Scott came around, the more and more he erased people's fears. And he had a great team, and he hired people from the community. Also, as they were building their infrastructure for what they're doing, they also helped people in the community build up what they were doing simultaneously. So it felt like a real community type of thing and trust type of thing, because you didn't feel like somebody was doing what often happens in our community. They come in, suck the blood out the community, and the community feels like, how do we benefit? Right?
Is that process kind of the way you have been used to it working? Someone just sort of helicoptering in, taking, extracting, and not actually being a meaningful presence of sticking around, or even being concerned about, well, what are folks up to here? Like, how can I help them as well?
I'm going to tell you what I'm used to. I'm used to people studying what I've done and what others in my community have done great, right? Model it, and then sell it back to us like they created it. That's what I'm used to. You know what I'm saying? Scott did the direct opposite, and that doesn't happen. Normally, if you go on U Street in Washington, D.C., you see all this art of Black people done by nobody Black. And they call this the U Street corridor, you know, the historic U Street corridor where Duke Ellington was, but nobody who looked like Duke Ellington actually put their hands on anything. And, you know, partnerships can be beautiful. When you stop listening to the people, right, you basically start doing a disservice to the community and the people who live there. And this can be a narrative, a new narrative that's created that can go throughout the world, throughout the country. This is a real example of how it should be done.
Let's be real, lawsuits are not fun, but with Paulson and Nace, at least they're a little easier. Paulson and Nace is a DC law firm in every sense of the word. It was founded here in 1979. Partner Chris Nace is a local who cares deeply about the DC community, even serving on the board of the local branch of the Living Classrooms Foundation in his free time. Nace and his associates Samantha Peters and Maya Perry handle medical malpractice, wrongful death, and other complex injury cases. And they don't just settle every case. They'll go to court. They'll fight for you. Paulson and Nace has even been recognized as one of U.S. News' best law firms. So if you have been hurt or lost a loved one because of someone else's mistake or negligence, call Paulson and Nace for a no-obligation consultation. Visit www.paulsonandnace.com. That's PAULSONANDNACE.com. Or call 202-463-1999.
Experience a live performance with premium seating at Warner Theater or the Fillmore Silver Spring. Live Nation Premium amenities totally change the concert experience with things like complimentary parking and private entry. Members also have access to in-seat wait service and exclusive food and beverage menus. Trust me, there is no better way to experience a live performance of a band, comedian, or even podcaster you love. Premium members get access and offerings before doors open to the VIP speakeasy-style 1924 lounge at Warner Theater and Vertigo Lounge at the Fillmore. Visit premium.livenation.com for more information, or contact Mary Claire Griffin at maryclairegriffin@livenation.com or at 202-626-8255. That's a great pivot to talk about what the current vision for the park is. Scott, can you tell me a little bit about what you're thinking for this park? What will it look like? How big will it be?
Sure. So the park itself will be about the size of 3 football fields stacked end to end to end. So it's about 7.5 acres all told.
Wow.
and most of it over the water, right? To Ron's point, this river has been this dividing line for generations, right? So I think of all the goals that we had for the park, like this idea of bringing together residents who otherwise wouldn't normally connect, right? I think was the goal that most viscerally sort of connected with local residents. So we just commissioned a series of public art for the park that's beautiful. I mean, it's really stunning. And Jackson Jarvis Studios that are designed this beautiful sculpture called Anacostia Sunrise Sunset Portals. Martha Jackson Jarvis was the artist who did the giant artwork around the Anacostia metro station that folks might be familiar with, to a giant mural that's on the Navy Yard side that celebrates the Native American inhabitants, the Nacotchtank and the Piscataway tribes, to as I mentioned, this 250-person outdoor river amphitheater that will have the river as a backdrop. So this is the place that we see, there'll be local acts, there'll be local music. And in addition to all of that, though, I think what was really critical is right after we selected the design team, we looked around the country and saw where there were these types of projects around the United States, and to see what were the intended and sometimes unintended consequences of these types of projects. And we're expecting, 800,000 people a year could come to this park, right? And how do we ensure that the same thousands, tens of thousands of residents who shaped this project from the beginning can be the ones that benefit from it? So, we've stood up a community land trust. The Douglas Community Land Trust now has over 230 units of permanently affordable housing. We have 122 Ward 8 renters who've become homeowners, right? Capturing generational wealth who've gone through our Ward 8 Homebuyers Club. And we've just graduated our 27th construction training program, because if we're spending all this money to build the park, we want to make sure as much of those dollars go back into the local community as possible. But to do that, we need to ensure that local residents have the skill set and capacity to apply for and succeed at these jobs. So, when the general contractor comes to us and says, well, I can't find any East of the River residents to hire, we can say, well, here's a list of over 150 East of the River residents who currently have jobs in the construction trades now, today, right? So think again and try a little harder, right? But it's that sort of level of intentionality that I think is key to fight those issues of displacement and gentrification.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And I guess I'm curious to know from you, Ron, as with all new development, I'm sure it does raise some questions about gentrification, particularly east of the river. What are folks in the community saying about that?
I just think gentrification works both ways. It works from having people who are not building people up, because the only way that you really fight gentrification is not just affordable housing, it's also building people up to be able to afford any housing without a voucher, without assistance, right? So that they're not just a renter, they're an owner. And we got to be intentional about that. You can't just talk it. You got to put systems in place to do that. So to me, like, the model that Scott has put together, to me, is a well-rounded model. It deals with, when you do an assessment of the problems, you got to have solutions to the problems. And while it might not solve all our problems like crime and things, it kind of does, because if you give somebody wealth and ownership, then they tend not to destroy what they own, right? So we have to think along those lines in urban communities, whether you're building a bridge or you're just trying to deal with gentrification. And I don't think that we do enough of that in our communities. And that's why I think this project is so important. We were able to convince council members to give us $2 million to buy our properties so that Black established businesses wouldn't get pushed out. And then we were able to get grant money to now build a go-go museum and restaurants and things like that right here. And the thing is, just like once Scott completes what he's doing, and once we complete what we're doing, nobody can say we can't do this again. Nobody can say you can't go and invest in former gang members and get them equity, and they can show you why you should invest in them doing this versus investing in jails. And it's about accountability, because this didn't happen without accountability.
Yeah, so it sounds like residents feel that this park could be a good change for the neighborhood, but not just for the neighborhood, in terms of helping folks reimagine what is actually possible for our communities and for our spaces.
Yes, absolutely. And I think people just didn't come on the bandwagon. Guy had to earn it. Him and his team had to earn it. So it didn't happen overnight, trust me. And I think that style should be for everybody.
What was that like, Scott?
Well, we've had over 1,000 meetings with the community, and we stopped counting after 1,000, right? So, and as Ron said, it's like, You can't take things personal. I got yelled at and things, but it wasn't about me. It wasn't about the park, right? I mean, it's just like people wanted to be heard. People wanted a voice, right? I was giving a presentation at the annual Anacostia Coordinating Council. This was years ago. And giving a presentation about like the designs for the park and all of our equitable development strategies. And somebody raised their hand and asked a question that I didn't quite know how to answer. They said, with all of the investments you made in housing and preservation of Black-owned businesses and, workforce development, like, that's all great, but do you need to build the park? And I was like, I just committed like 5 years of my life at that point to build the park.
Like, park is in your title.
So whatever, it was a legitimate question. And I was struggling with figuring out how to answer it. And someone else in the audience stood up and said, like, they better build that park. Like, we've been designing this park for the last 5 years. And I was like, there you go. That's your answer. But that shows like true ownership, right? I mean, that means this isn't Scott's park. This is the community's park, right? And it's critical not only of making sure that the community is to the river that is going to help build this park, but we're going to have 40 full-time staff on this park, right? Just like my team now, reflects the community that we serve, like those same staff, right? The rangers and the architects and the, maintenance staff and people raising funds, like everywhere, they also need to reflect the community that we serve. And we're working on that right now. I'd say one other thing is that we're now advising nearly a dozen similar projects around the country who are following the same process that we've had of engaging with the community really early and intentionally. And it's so rewarding to see we're now learning from our colleagues around the country, just as they've been learning from us. But we're the nation's capital, right? Like, we should be setting the model. We should be setting the template for how to do this right.
What have both of you learned in undertaking this project? It seems like there's so many different lessons and different models that have revealed itself. Like, what have both of you taken away from this project?
I can tell you, it just proves something that I already knew, that when people are intentional about making sure everybody gets equity and inclusion, change can happen and still be positive. And I think that the 11th Street Bridge Park feeds right into historic Anacostia, and it can be a model of how you preserve culture, how you preserve the existence of people who were there when nobody wanted to be there, but also welcome with open arms people who want to come and even make the community greater without pushing out people who wake up every day and work as hard as any of us to do the right thing. And I think that should be the goal of this.
That's beautiful.
That is beautiful. Thank you, Ron. I'd say not to be afraid to widen the aperture. You need to recognize that the answers are already in the community, right? But you just need to listen to those. And the answers are, and residents were saying like, hey, this is great, but like, what about housing? What about jobs? What about wealth creation, right? And we need to listen to that. And now that equitable development plan is just as important as building the park. Like, this is an obvious thing to say, but for this to be a successful model, you need to build the park, right? And so we're, going to be breaking ground at the end of this year. It's super exciting, but it's that those deep investments that we've made in the nearby community are just as important as building the bricks and mortar of this new civic space.
Amen. Thank you both so much for being here. Ronald Moten, Scott Kratz. Can't wait to hang out in that park. Maybe I'll see you there.
Few short years, we're walking across that bridge together. Can't wait.
Take care.
Oh, and listeners, don't go anywhere. In just a second, we've got a segment sponsored by KC Trees. CityCast's Priyanka Tilve is sitting down with the group's Director of Policy and Land Conservation.
Hey, I'm Priyanka Tilve here with Kelly Collins-Choi. She's the Director of Policy and Land Conservation at KC Trees. Kelly, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
I feel like most people in DC know KC Trees as those people you can call to get a tree planted for free in your yard. And that's a totally awesome service that you guys provide. But you also do a bunch of other work on land conservation in DC. Can you tell me a little bit about some of the successes y'all have had in that space?
Sure. So as you said, I think most people know KC Trees for our tree planting work across the city. But another part of our mission is to protect our city's existing tree canopy. And so to that end, we've been acting as a land trust for about the past 10 years when we recorded our first conservation easement, which was on Crispus Attucks Park in Bloomingdale.
Which we actually did an episode of. We talked with some of the organizers there. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So the easement that we hold provides permanent protection for that green space so that it can never be paved over with asphalt or concrete. So our goal is really to protect existing tree canopy, but also protect green spaces for future trees to grow and for the benefits of the community.
That's really great. What are some of the conservation projects you're working on right now?
So many people don't realize how many unprotected, environmentally sensitive areas we have in DC. And we're looking to conserve areas including forest patches, wetlands, and stream buffers that provide important habitat for wildlife, as well as the benefits of cooling and air purification for neighboring communities. So right now, we're in the process of acquiring a few properties along a tributary of the Anacostia River. And our intent is to plant trees there as stream buffers to help with water quality and flood mitigation for surrounding neighbors. Another one that we're really excited to be working on is with the resident in historic Anacostia. She wants to donate a conservation easement on a forest patch adjacent to her childhood home and eventually build a natural trail to encourage community access to nearby nature.
Oh my gosh, I love that. And especially in that part of town that's really needed, right?
Absolutely.
Kelly, I know a lot of this stuff can be really complex. What is a land trust in the first place?
So land trusts are nonprofits that preserve land by acquiring and stewarding land or conservation easements. There are over 1,200 land trusts working throughout the country, but most focus in rural areas. Only about a dozen work primarily in cities. It can be tough work because cities are low on undeveloped land and high on cost, but the impact of conservation is also so much higher because it benefits such a density of surrounding residents. We're preserving small spaces, often a quarter of an acre or less, but they can have a huge impact.
You touched on this a little bit. I mean, obviously, flood mitigation is important, access to nature is important, but tell me a little bit more about why this work is so valuable.
So our city is fully urbanized, right? It continues to grow and develop. We currently have more impervious surface in DC than we do green space. I really want to preserve the best of what's remaining of our natural areas and our forest patches and target areas for preservation that can provide multiple environmental, community health, and climate resilience benefits for the long-term sustainability of our city.
How can people who are hearing this and want to get involved do that? I mean, this sounds like some really great work to be part of.
Absolutely. Land Conservation Month is June. So we'd love to hear from you if you know of land that could or should be preserved. We can work with private property owners, houses of worship, schools, and even the DC government in protecting land through conservation easements. You can go to kctrees.org to fill out an easement nomination form. And we'll also be fundraising for land preservation and stewardship and hosting a fun conservation event at Hellbender Brewery on June 30th. Which is adjacent to one of our easement sites where we often host community cleanups. We'll have food trucks and live music, and we'd love to see you all there.
Wow, June 30th. I'm going to mark my calendar. Kelly, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, and again, check out kctrees.org to learn more. We'll have that link in our show notes as well, so you're just a click away. Thanks for listening.
That's all for today here on CityCast DC. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell your friend who loves parks? You can rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our morning newsletter.